Welcome back, everyone, to the Season 9 Phase 3 playoffs. It's still Gore. Now I've got Mifflin on the desk. We'll talk to you in a little bit, because first, I've got to let everybody know. First off, if you like laptops, I've got a really, really good place where you can go for it. But if you're looking for a new PC, especially as, like the holidays come around, presents, I know, at least in my family, for some reason, everyone's birthday is in the last 2 months. I don't know why. But if you're looking for convenient presents, or as if earlier you also end up in a scenario where you have to buy your wife a brand new PC, you can go and, to smitegame.com/alienware, pick up a fantastic computer. I actually use my Alienware laptop all the time. I was using it last week at Thanksgiving while I was actively avoiding some of the conversations that would happen times when I was too socialed out. And so being able to go back, watch videos, I was using it for like a lot of Google Docs, a lot of payouts, things like that, fun stuff. You can go to smitegame.com, use code 8WSmite09, get discounts not on the laptops. You can get it on the Aurora Ryzen R10 desktops that they're playing out there, the 244 hertz gaming monitors, all that fun stuff the players are playing on, so you can level up your gameplay. Of course, thanks to Alienware. You can follow them at Alienware on Instagram and Twitter. You can go to alienwarearena.com to join their global community for giveaways and a ton more over there. So thanks to Alienware one more time. Thanks to Mifflin again for sitting with me here as we move on to the Kings and the Bolts as they take each other on. Now, Mifflin, this is one that I was very interested in coming into today, because the Kings, again, maybe you could call it a slump, and I think actually that's a direct quote from Twig saying that they were in a little bit of a slump. And let me tell you, if you get in third place and you're in a slump, something's going real good for your team. But they said that they were in a slump. They're going to be taking on the Bolts, who didn't say they were in a slump, but we all saw it. They didn't need to say it. We can take a look at how this bracket's going to shake out for them. Winner of this goes against the Dragons. Loser will be, again, awaiting an opponent from tomorrow to try and take on Saturday, the 3rd, to see who can then move on to a seeding match, qualify for Worlds. A very interesting, honestly, position to be in if you're here. And this is where things, in my mind, are very interesting, because you look at the Kings, you look at the Bolts, this is 3rd versus 6th. Not just the gap in play we saw in Phase 3, Mifflin. Looking at the whole year long, the Kings have had this matchup. Now, they've gone to 3 games with the Bolts just as many times as they've 2-0'd them. The Kings have not lost to the Bolts so far this year. And so this is a moment for the Bolts to answer some questions that I think everybody's asking, which is, what are you going to do? Like, what are we getting this weekend? Are we getting a Bolts team that we expected maybe last year? Are we getting the Bolts that started off Phase 3? Those are going to be very different teams, whereas the Kings, it's just, did they find that consistency? Are they, as they had said in their last week, out of that slump and kind of into the end of the year?
And, Gore, I loved asking with you because you can keep me honest, stat man. So I'm going to try and say a stat. You let me know if I'm wrong. I believe so far this year, 6-0 for the Kings up against the Bolts. They have not lost a set in all 6. Maybe some go 3. A lot of them did not. But when we talk about the Kings and we talk about their slump, I think you look in the jungle as of reason. Captain Twig, no stranger to being critical of himself, has had a couple of iffy performances out of the jungle, has had a couple of great performances as of recent. So whether or not the team is in a slump, I think begins and ends with the conversation around Twig, which is surprising considering they've got a roster swap, right? At least not one coming in this week like the Titans have, but one that they've had recently. Yarkor for Netroid in the duo lane. And Yarkor has quickly cemented himself in my mind, and I think should be cemented in the zeitgeist of Smite as large and the tapestry of time as one of the best players to have ever done it, full stop. I mean, nobody else has made as rapid a shift in roles as Yarkor, and then simultaneously dominated their new role. Yarkor in the solo, bangers. This man don't miss. It W's. Yarkor in duo, don't miss. Support or ADC, it doesn't matter. He's just going to do it very well. So when we have conversations about other players in the league, they're like, oh, Scream, he's like one of the best junglers. Or PBM, he's one of the best support players. Or, any of these guys, we would say best role. I'm thinking when you talk about Yarkor, the only way to describe him is that's a good Smite player. This guy simply understands the mechanics of this game, understands the positions and requirements to be dominant in any given role, knows what he wants from his teammates, and is able to execute on it himself. And that is a scary thing to think, because now he's got an idea of not only what he needs to do, but what everyone else is trying to do to him, because he's been on the other side. So keep your eyes on Yarkor, man. This guy has only impressed me.
Not only that, but and I think much to the bane of conversation you're having. I think when you look grand scheme, there's conversations about who's the greatest SMITE players of all time, right? And there's, I guess, SMITE Mount Rushmore, things like that, where you have to put them up there. And there's a lot of players that get thrown on that list, despite maybe not having like the wild success. Like Zapman, that's an easy throw. He's got so many rings that like his hand is literally weighed down because of it. But then you look at players. Baskin was in that conversation for a long time. I think Hardcore is in there for pretty much the same reason. Cyclone Spin for the same reason. They're just really good at SMITE, and it just depends on how they tackle it. And of course, he meshed incredibly well in my mind with the Kings. We got to see that for a few times. Twig had said he had been in a slump. You had kind of mentioned that earlier, and they said that picking up Hardcore kind of reinvigorated the fire for a lot of them. And while it wasn't necessarily the thing they wanted to do, making that swap, it's definitely improved for the team. We'll see how they fare today as they take on the Olympus Bolts. And Mifflin, I feel a little bad because when you swap over there, you see Hardcore, first off, plays 3 roles this year in his role and has been damn good at all of them. You come over to the Bolts, who, for a while, it was ride or die based on Lasber. Honestly, might still be a little bit ride or die based on Lasber's performance. So you have to look at the jungle, but you also have to look over towards the carry. I mentioned it earlier this year, but Phase 3, Barra quickly shot up to the most first bloods in a game. Unfortunately, that didn't necessarily translate to as much success in the standings. But then it started to slow down. They were having to deal with the change of not having Haddix anymore, having Baskin. And it still feels like this team is kind of maybe searching for that pressure. And the dual lane consistency is nice, but consistent hasn't been enough. They need to elevate.
Yeah, and I want to maybe change the narrative around the Olympus Bolts. I agree with the conversation that if the Olympus Bolts are winning, it's probably because Laz was having a phenomenal game.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation that I think you generally bring up when it's everybody's performing well, and then Lazarus the guy who's going to tip you over the edge and make sure it's a dub.
Yeah, true.
I don't think that's the conversation around the Olympus Bolts anymore, and I hate to be negative about it, but the support player, Awesome Jake, has just not had great performances as of recent. He's been a bit lost in some of these engagements, very consistently first-blooded for this team as well. You talk about consistency for the duo lane, I think Barracuda's got it. Jake's got to step up to the rest of this team, and it's I suppose overshadowed a bit with some of the roster changes that were inflicted upon them as of recent, with Baskin having to step into the solo lane, with the Olympus Bolts losing out on Haddix. You'd expect there to be a bit of growing pains. I'd argue the growing pains have not been in Baskin's lane. Baskin has looked very well. Maybe one game where he's like, oh wait, SPL's different, right? It's not SEC anymore.
Oh, I had to learn some new things again.
Yeah, sorry, the pace is a little bit different, guys. And then immediately he was back into it. Now you have to look elsewhere, and there have been long overarching issues for the Olympus Bolts, and I think a lot of them are rooted through their support player. They need to get this guy comfortable. They need to get him on something consistent. And then once they iron that out, the Olympus Bolts can go back to being one of those dominant teams in the league that we were used to earlier in the year.
Well, the good news is we actually got to sit down, and again, because these teams, very convenient, they happen to know what rosters they were going in with and playing against. And this one, we actually got to sit down with them a little earlier this week to see what their thoughts were on this matchup. We talked to the junglers to see what their thoughts were.
Our team has done all right this phase. We have thrown some big leads that are definitely not optimal, but that's what happens, and hopefully we improve from that. We definitely worked a lot on our drafts and what we want to do in-game, so we definitely improved a bit that way.
I think it's been bittersweet. I think all of us maybe hoped for better. The way the teams kind of ended is absolutely perfect, though. I think during the season, we got that direction to make the replacement for Jarkor, which maybe gave us the best odds ever at winning the World Championship.
I would rate my team pretty highly, qualifying to Worlds through the playoffs. We have done pretty good into majority of the teams. Sometimes we have had a bit of a struggle ending the games, but any of the teams we've had like huge leads into 10K leads and whatnot, so I feel pretty confident as long as we can make sure we get a good draft.
So during the playoffs, I think it'd be a huge upset to not qualify. It's top 4, so we just have to be better than 2 teams of the top 6, which I think we'd be very disappointed if we don't. But anything can happen. It's any given weekend, so we're very hopeful. Hopefully we take that first or second spot.
There are few things in that interview, Mifflin, that I pick up on, but one of the first things, and this is like maybe the weirder one, but it's the demeanor with which, because we got kind of similar answers from both. Like, yeah, we expect to be able to qualify, but Twig felt like he had less pressure on his shoulders than I heard in Lasber's voice, right? You could tell, like, Twig's like, we just got to be better than 2 teams. We're coming in as the 3rd seed. That roster swap actually kind of really did help us out. Feels good. Like, he felt, not necessarily like he believed what he's saying. I think they both did, but he felt a lot more relaxed overall. Whereas listening to Lasber, you could hear it where it's kind of like similar notes, think we can do it, but you could tell that there was a little more pressure on him and on the team, I think, admittedly, to perform to that. They're going to be first pick here, the Bolts are, as they get into game number 1. Kings, right now, they're actually on a 5-set win streak. Last time they lost was in week 5 of phase 3 against the Valkyries, which I think proves exactly what Twig had said at the end of that, which is any given weekend, sometimes that's all it takes. The question I think that's on my mind right now is if it's the Bolts weekend or not.
Bolts fans putting their hands together, maybe up to the sky to give them some energy. But certainly I think the Olympus Bolts have got some cards that they could play here. They are still a very strong team. They've got very consistent win conditions and ones that the Kings have already started to take notice of. Jake looks best when he's on his Nox.
Yep.
The Kings say, we don't want Jake at his best, so we're going to go ahead and take that one off. The Daji seems to be a keystone of a lot of the Olympus Bolts' most highly performing composition. The Kings, not unlike the entirety of the rest of the league, say, maybe we just don't give over the Daji. They banned that one out as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I got full stoppered by that.
Yo, is Panicat in the Bolts booth?
Yeah, Panicat's not doing it first slot, though. And Panicat's like doing it like back when like Merc was getting locked in with it, too. This is different.
Different.
Are you worried that Danzaburo is going to get taken? Because I don't think that should be a concern. What a crazy top pick.
Danza, maybe I would argue maybe one of the least contested ADCs in the game.
Yeah, it's like him and Scotty.
Yeah, well, him and Scotty, right? I was gonna say you like throw Neath, but like even Neath gets a ban. The Kings like to play.
BMT loves that pick.
They lock it in first here. They grab it with the Ares for the duo lane. Scylla locked in as well, and we did see Kernanos banned out. Cupid picked up. Both of them received a little bit of a nerf, but. Does that, I mean, nothing changed for Danza. I guess, Devourer's Gauntlets got nerfed slightly as well. You're still giving me a perplexed look, so instead I'll look at the Kings for a second. Cupid, Vulcan, Ymir locked in. A lot of that, Mifflin, that makes sense. That's a top 3 that just screams Kings.
Yeah, that's a top 3 selection for the Kings that any one of those individual picks could have been taken first overall, and I would not have bat an eye.
In fact, they've first picked the Ymir 3 times this year.
I mean,
And
consistent, strong composition from the Camelot Kings. You've got the setup for the Vulcan very easily.
Huh.
I mean, Danzaburo's got okay matchup into Cupid, right? Like, you're not going to get Fields of Loved, like, ever. You've got a little bit of self-sustain as well with the drinking the sake, so you can at least match some of the sustain that Cupid's got in lane. Don't think it needed to be a first pick, but I suppose if you haven't got if you haven't got any eyes for standard top picks, because the top 3 from the Olympus Bolts, I would argue, are generally all comfort picks or flavor picks for the most part. Scylla's been going up in the standings a little bit recently, but not exactly one that we see consistently up there. Ares has gone up a bit in his stock price as well, but not exactly a consistent pick either. But what the Olympus Bolts have got is potentially one of the best miracle situation compositions here. Like, this is like a jackpot draft in that if beads are down, pull in a couple with Ares, you got the sake set up already, so they're taunted in. You got I'm a Monster for follow-up too. I mean, there certainly is inherent synergy to this composition as is.
Yeah.
But I need to see something that's going to tie it together.
Well, I don't know if this sways you one way or another. When the Bolts have played Vulcan throughout Phase 3, they lost every game against him. And so that is, I mean, admittedly, that maybe speaks more to Vulcan.
You're telling me the Bolts have never beat Vulcan?
They have not beat Vulcan in Phase 3 of this last year.
I'm shook.
They also just haven't beat the Kings this year in a set, so that is going to be an interesting one to tackle. Amaterasu, Guan Yu, banned out by the Kings. Hades and Tyr, which it actually kind of surprises me. Hades is one of the top first picked gods by the Bolts because Baskinlow's playing it. So it means they're shifting up something. Thor gets locked in for the Kings. We saw this in solo in the last set. Do you have a feeling, is this jungle something more likely for Twig, or do you think Variety could rock it?
Last time we saw Twig on Thor in the jungle.
I think his team did like call him out and tell him he was trolling.
Yeah, Genetics
right?
said we'll
We had,
never
like, a whole
see it again.
meme
Like, we
video
had
on
an interview with Genetics, and he said you'll never see it again. So likelihood of it going to Captain Twig, I'd argue a bit lower, but certainly potential there. I mean, I'll never vote against a Thor jungle. I think that is forever going to be Thor's home. But Solo Thor, as of recent, with the Runeforge build, has been a little bit more consistent, having the ability to rotate into these mid 3v3 fights and turn it into 4v3s because your global presence always going to be very valuable. And the Kings keep us guessing as we wait for that 5th lock-in. I love this draft from the Kings, top to bottom. I mean, every single one of these picks has got synergies with another. The team fight in the late game doesn't fall off. The pick pressure in the early is still incredibly strong as well. The Olympus Bolts, good late game team fight, good potential to burn beads. Single target CC from Danzaburrow if he wants to use that rocket form to set up for I'm a Monster, or Ares can burn beads consistently, AoE style with no escape. Scylla's always going to be that, hey, I hit 2 ultimates, so we want a team fight style of pick as well. So the Olympus Bolts have got potential to fight in, but a bit puzzling in the composition.
Yeah, it's definitely one that's throwing us for a little bit of a loop. We'll see how they close it out, though. Maybe that's kind of the plan. Normally, we see something like this. Maybe there's a high precedent for what they throw into the jungle, what they throw into solo. They grab Athena, who we saw on the Rise, and they grab the Loki. Now, Mifflin, because of the changes, Loki to me feels like he's probably jungle and feels like something for Lasbro. Athena and Ares, we have technically both seen solo, both seen support lately. Do you have a preference either way?
Man, once we get a look at the Kings' last lock-in, so I have a more solid idea of what the soul lane matchup could be, I think it'll be a bit easier to figure out the allocation of these 2 picks. I mean, the Bolts certainly could flex them back and forth. I think much more likely that it will be Athena in the soul lane, though. And with Lancelot locked in, that's one of Captain Twig's bread and butter. So, will be Thor solo. I think that does leave you in a position where you'd much rather have the Athena in solo so that she can match the rotation, as well as just having the ability to kind of disrupt the combo in lane. If you're really heads up on it, you can prevent the teleport for Thor. He throws out the hammer, confound, you're stuck here. Or if he's starting the Berserker's Barrage of the Wave, confound, all of a sudden your wave clear takes a pretty major hit as well. So, decent matchup there, and one that you don't need to concern yourself so much with Thor just really tipping the scales in the Camelot King's favor towards those mid 3v3s. This composition from the Olympus Bolts has got one absolutely all-encompassing major advantage, and it is that nobody else is playing compositions like this. They've got the element of surprise. It's not on the periodic table, but it will be on the battleground.
And that's actually something that I think is worth noting, because specifically I think we last saw Lasbro play this Loki like literally 2 weeks ago. It's the last week. They come in, plays it. He's only played it 5 games, but he's got a 60% win rate. He's got a 10.4 KDA on this pick. So the Loki fits him pretty nicely. The other thing I was going to touch on was the Athena, which I believe has more often than not the last few weeks been going over there towards Jake and has won all of the games Jake's played. It's only 3 of them, but still, you were mentioning, I think both of those players, like, you know, Lazarus being somebody that if you're winning, he's going to win harder for you, and Jake as being a necessity to win the game, period, if he's going to play well. If you look past the Nox, there haven't been a lot of Guardians that immediately come to my mind. I mean, his Yamoja, his Ymir, which last year were really solid, in Phase 3 at least, kind of left us wanting more. I feel like this Athena, if it is the Athena, could be the thing that maybe helps alleviate some of that.
It could be. Man, the Bolts, their composition does keep me guessing, right? Because there still is potential. I know that I've really got the Athena likely for solo lane, but we have seen Jake play it, as you said. Has decent matchup there.
Does Baskin even like Ares solo?
Not many people do. I can
like
count on
Deathwalker?
Deathwalker, and I'd be struggling to guess many other people that have gone towards this pick in the soul lane.
I don't think I can think of another.
Yeah, so likelihood of Ares over there, I think very low. So Ares for Jake. A little bit of pressure early on, bolster defense, helps out with that survivability. Still is largely immobile against a composition from the Kings that have got really high pick potential. I mean, displacement from Ymir, just throw up the freeze, throw up a wall. Ares doesn't really have an answer to that. Could make it a bit sticky for the Olympus Bolts in the early, but they've picked this draft for a reason. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what can the Bolts do with this draft. It's game 1 of set number 2 here in the Phase 3 playoffs, and it's Trelly and, of course, Dave.
I wonder if he forgot my name there for a second. Do you think he did?
I think he's like Trillian, that one guy who hangs around every once in a while.
And that other dude. Look, it's been a week of downtime, but we're finally back, and we've got Phase 3 playoffs today. Not qualification or elimination matches, but leading into that over the next couple of days. In Trelly, so much unknown coming into this event, and I think I'll start looking at the Olympus Bolts here. Not only their composition, a bit of an unknown, but how the team has started to mesh together over the last week or so. How are they going to show up? I mean, they've got a tall task here against the Kings, a team that very well could have ended up in the top 2. And so I think a lot of answers for the Olympus Bolts here in Game 1.
And that's what we're looking for, and I like the way that they've switched up their draft. Love the Scylla. I think with the changes to her early clear, could be a real powerhouse once that mid-game comes around. The Donza first pick is a bit questionable, but hey, Bear is just feeling confident on the Donza, and maybe he just knew that the Cupid was coming and thought he had a good matchup, that sort of thing. But more specifically, Lasbra on this Loki. The way that the Olympus Bolts play SMITE.
The Loki.
The Loki.
You know, like when you talk about player name and god combos, this one's just the
Loki.
Loki.
The Loki. Yeah, I got you. A little bit of enunciation
Sure.
there. But the way that the Olympus Bolts play SMITE, usually through Lasbra trying to get a lead up on the opposition, Loki does something better than any other jungler, and that is make the other jungler's life miserable. He's probably going to win that 1v1 versus Captain Twig if he can find him. If Lasbra gets behind, of course, Loki is just a big minion. He's completely useless. But if he's able to stay even or ahead, Loki dominates that 1v1.
Lasbra already over in the mid lane. Does Ven have Sikkim? Sure does. Tings loses his beads, and there's an early advantage for the Bolts. Now the immobile Vulcan without the beads for the next 160 seconds or so. So small win for the Bolts to start off this game. I want to look back left, though, Trelly, and you kind of mentioned it running down the composition for the Bolts here. Really Barracuda on this Don's I want to look at from 2 different angles. One, you maybe hint at a potential good matchup, and that's a decent wall from Genetics, just zoning off while Twig to pick up the Interceptor. Do you feel like Donza has a good matchup into this Cupid? Do you think that there is some value there? And also, I admittedly am a bit surprised. I don't think Donza in aggression really meshes with Barracuda and what we've seen from him recently in my mind. So I think it's a different playstyle for Bear altogether.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that a switch just went off in Bear's head where he's like, it's Worlds time. You know, like,
right.
I need to heat it up. I can't sit back and watch my team get behind. You know, I need to be part of the answer.
Right.
So Donza being able to rock it in does provide a certain level of aggression that Bear sometimes is used to, sometimes isn't. But
into the Cupid?
Right, into the Cupid specifically, you've got lots of ways to deal with Fields of Love. If you just go into the Rocket and try and chase him down, your 1v1 is sick. My issue, however, is not with the Cupid, but with the Ymir. Walling off that Rocket, incredibly easy. As long as the Genetics is on point, Barra should not be using it to get in or get out, assuming this Ymir is there with wall available.
That's one of Genetics' best picks, right? All year long, this Ymir has totally changed up team fights and set up for big man Tings out of mid. We've seen a lot of the big burst damage ultimates from big man Tings and those types of characters throughout the year. And we'll get another one for Tings here in Game 1. It's the Vulcan for him. On the flip side, Ven with the Scylla, and Trell, you and I were kind of joking before the cast, like I want a meta at Worlds where Scylla's back in it. I mean, I think of amazing Paul plays and the types of moments that Scylla can create, individual moments, then of course the rest of the team playing around it. But if you're zoning in on just this game here, lots of steal and execute potential out of the mid lane.
Yes, certainly. There's big burst damage for both of those mid laners. I'm curious to see where Baskin decides to channel that Defender of Olympus. He's got teleport, so he's able to ult over the left side of the map and then teleport back over to right if he needs, try and set up for his team wherever, especially on this Athena. Looks like BMT is just going to be backing up, send that Earthshaker out just for clear. Probably realized that Lasbra was close by, maybe looking to get a kill before those beats come off cooldown in the next 15 seconds. But BMT's been around for a while, knows that timer pretty well, and does not want to give himself to the assassinate. Either way, though, playing around the Athena. Probably something the Olympus Bolts are going to look to do, wait around until Baskin gets a little bit more damage, start stacking up that Book of Thoth maybe, and then those rotations come through. Incredible amount of beats burning, as well as just easy setup for Awesome Jake as well.
Yeah, this has got to be a step-up game you'd imagine for Jake, right? I mean, has not had the best series of games for this Olympus Bolts team in the last couple of weeks. Has looked fine, but a bit of a far cry, admittedly, from the potential that we know Jake has. This is a perfect game for an Ares on one side or the other. Either you're burning beads, and then you've got taunts, assassinates, sickums, rockets to follow up on that. So either you're setting up for your team, or presumably those things I just listed are knocking down the beads and allowing you as the Ares then to get these big pulls in. So I look to Jake later on in this game, has the sprint now, potentially using that around Fields of Love, but maybe aggressively later on in the game. Should be a big one from awesome Jake. Now I look towards Basket over in the solo lane. Variety on this Thor as well. We've seen the Runeforged Thor. That's been kind of the name of the game. Set up some big damage numbers. But on Athena as well, Trelly, we've seen heavy damage builds akin to the Hades that we've seen all phase long in phase 3. You a fan of full-on damage on Athena, or do you like to see hybrid at some point?
Oh, I absolutely love the Athena combo, especially with Loki. I would not be surprised if we saw the combo, but Athena channels the Defender of Olympus, and then Lasbra ults in for that double explosion damage.
Right.
The more Baskin builds burst, the more that combo could just absolutely delete Big Man Tings or even Yarkor, depending on what Captain Twig builds. He could also be in that topic of conversation. So holding on to that Aegis once it comes through, or you know, the amount of sustain they're going to need to try and survive that combo. I just hope they're able to pull it off, because it's always exciting to watch. But Lasbra on the Loki kind of has to play back, whereas Captain Twig, he's pretty much online. If he's able to make a rotation over to left lane, you know, Awesome Jake does have the sprint, but it's still a very long way that the horse can help you out and try and find some aggression. But it looks like he's not looking to find any ganks. He's just sort of running to farm as you would expect. It is the Camelot Kings, right? They love getting their farm and not fighting for the bit.
Yeah, they're hanging for another 20 minutes if they have it their way. Now, do have to be careful, not only in team fights we talked about between Ven and Tings and those ultimates and stealing away objectives, confirming, hopefully, if you're the team that pulls it, could potentially give the Kings some pause if Ven is on point, rotating to those early objectives. Being there for his team, contesting them, can really stall out a lot of what the Kings want to do. Everyone has kept pace with one another early on here in this game, maybe a level lead here or there, but more likely than not, just the way the waves are being pressed right now. And we've talked a bit about Lasbra. I am curious, you know, I think right now just farming up, doing his thing with Captain Twig, farming up very, very well on the other side. Come team fight time, you talk about playing back. Do you think Lasbra's goal is make Ting specifically as uncomfortable as possible in these fights, hoping that you can delay out the Vulcan come objective pull, come team fight time in the next 10 or so minutes?
Yeah, it's just a pretty easy matchup for Loki specifically. You can go invis, juke out the turret, you're knock-up immune when you're channeling that aim strike. So you have plenty of opportunities to get to a Vulcan. Right. But Big Man Tings has got to be used to this amount of pressure towards his lane by now. He's got the burst damage to say, hey, if you're not killing me, I'm probably killing you or someone on your team. So Lasbra's sole job is to get to Ting's lane game. But, you know, it doesn't seem like early on, Ting's going to be stepping out. He's on the tower line. Ben has also been there. Quick farming, yes, at the top of the gold per minute charts for sure. Oh. But we are seeing a bit of a brawl over in duo.
That's nice from Jake. Double pull. Is Barra on this rocket? He sure is. Hello, Bolts. That's first blood. And Basket's here as well. A triple freeze from Genetics. Oh, it's necessary, but it hasn't saved his life. The tower dive, successful. Bolt, a big swing, and they connect with the Camelot Kings early. 2 kills for everyone but Lasbra, who gets the assist, and it's Ven who misses out over in the duo lane, but a great start for the Olympus Bolts.
That's exactly what you pick a composition like Ares Danzaburo for. You're able to find the beads onto Yarkor, the pull comes through, the chase after, and the rocket from Barracuda making sure to chase down Yark. Genetics was in good position. The meditation almost kept him alive, but now Awesome Jake might be getting aggressed on here. Tings has the ultimate, but looks like they're more so looking for that interceptor. They want a Captain Twig to confirm it and then back up, trying to get the scepter after the fight, but the Olympus Bolts strike first. And now, Yarkor's got to be careful. No beads for another 110 seconds. Jake's going to be sitting around this lane for quite some time.
That's right. Jake doesn't have sprint, used it defensively just now, but didn't need sprint to find the initiation just a moment ago. Got to be a bit of gameplay planned from both teams, Trelly, around the Ares and the Ymir. Neither one has beads. Of course, Jake can pop the ult and be a bit more safe, so can Genetics, but of course rooted in place. Maybe if you're the Bolts, you're just sending pressure right back towards this Ymir at some point. with only the med and could farm up some kills early in this game. But that's a nice start for the Olympus Bolts and has capitalized into just about 1,000 gold lead in the first big rotation over from Baskin as well. Variety in the meantime considered an answer, but instead just farmed things up, pulled a 1-level lead over Baskin on right. The Kings not a team to fully rest back. They want to go into these next objective fights, even ideally, to pull in from Awesome Jake. Captain Twig galloping away. Baskin, chunk damage on the Captain Twig. Earthshaker. That'll connect onto the Athena for a bit of damage. Jake caught next to Variety's wall, but it won't matter. Will the Anvil of Dawn be used defensively? Variety's considering it. We'll just dunk over by the Pyromancer. Out of sorts there from the Kings. Bolts had a decent answer and good disengage. Unable to punish the Ares.
Variety hasn't left yet, and Genetics is still here. They've got the walls. They at least want to make sure this Greater Scorpion doesn't go down. But lots of ultimates used there. Ven and Lazara were able to hold on to their ultimates, though, so the fight still could be the option. Once I saw Baskin ult in, I really thought Captain Twig could have been in more danger, but it just didn't seem like the Bolts wanted to follow up that far, a little deep into the Camelot Kings jungle. 10 minutes has went by, so Pyromancer could have been available.
Right.
But it looks like that's going to be the end of all the brawling over on this right side of the map. Some relics certainly down. BMT loses his, and it was a big ult from Awesome Jake, but now Pyromancer started up, and there's not a bolt in sight. They're going to let this one go down for free.
Wow, the Kings, they'll close up that gold gap handedly. And almost close back to even effectively is when you consider 500 or so spread across everyone on the Olympus Bolts. Bolts will get pressure and should get this tier 1 tower on left as Barracuda has kept that gas pedal pressed a bit. And I think for Bolts fans, Trelly, that's a welcome sight, right? Barra with pressure in lane, shoving down the opponent's tier 1 tower at 11 or so minutes. It had been quiet laning phases for weeks for Barracuda, and now knocks down first tower of the game. Assassinate out from Lazara and ult from Baskin. Big utility missing from the Bolts on the right side of the map. Twig will go in with an ult of his own, but Baskin, a timely dash away, disengages the fight. Look at this hovering, though, over by the Gold Fury. The Bolts could consider a pull, but you don't have Baskin's ult. You gotta remember, it's just a teleport in now if the Athena wants to fight on left.
Yeah, Captain Twig and Variety, I think, could fight Baskin for the next 5 minutes and they would never kill. It's just the way they've itemized. The Rune Forge is fine and the Sledge is good, but that's more so for a little bit of survivability and damage onto the squishies. The way this Athena has built, and not really fearing that assassin damage. Lazara, however, ulting out, probably the smart call. That's a full damage Loki, and you got to give a little bit of respect to the amount of damage these assassins can do to you. But if you're looking at the left side of the map, Barracuda does have that lead because Yarkor decided to upgrade his beats. Probably had to, just because Awesome Jake has those ultimates consistently onto this Cupid, and just the pressure of losing your tower that early. Barra can outbox him anytime he wants. He can force him out. Getting that tier 1 tower early means that fighting on the left side of the map seems smart. If I'm the Olympus Bolts, I'm trying to force a pull onto this Fury, send over Baskin. You probably have a pretty good shot at going for it, especially if you can get on the Tings.
Absolutely. If you could do it right now, you'll have an item advantage over Yark. But Yark goes back to base, picks up the Aegis at level 12. I think that's all he picked up. So still, yeah, he didn't have enough money for really anything. 600 gold in the back pocket. So a tier 2 item advantage for Barracuda. And I noted a moment ago, net worth charts, Barra about 1,000 gold ahead of Yark at this point in the game. So you're looking at, you know, call it 1.5K or so gold for the Bolts as their lead. Almost all of that, you know, 2/3 of it in the back pocket of Barracuda. So I think you're spot on there, Trelly. Trying to force a fight where that gold lead is, especially where some of your mid lane itemization is caught up as well. These Ama Monsters are going to hurt. Fully stacked Book of Thoth, Divine Ruin. Those will both connect quite nicely. Maybe if you're the Kings, you're feeling thankful that the Bolts haven't immediately gone over and pulled this Fury.
Yeah, this is, I think, where the Olympus Bolts have struggled is their objective play. They haven't struggled yet, but so far, trying to force the fights around their lead so they can continue has to be the call, and I think that's what they're doing here. Lazara goes into stealth. You can see the positioning towards this purple buff, trying to take away the farm from Yarkor, but also going for the pull. Baskin's ultimate is up, and he's got the teleport as well. They got to try and force something, but it looks like they're not too pressed about it. They're just trying to steal away farm before making that pull onto the objective.
No, Yark picks up his purple. So while not backbreaking by any means for the lead that Barracuda has, unable to extend it out even just a little bit further. So 1 level and a tier 2 item lead. Won't get converted into a Gold Fury just yet. Twig over on left, but so is Ven. It's going to be a return purple buff invade for the Kings. Remember, Baskin has ult if the Kings chose to fight. They do not. So not only do the Bolts not get the Kings purple, the Kings do go over and steal away the Bolts purple and have actually put a bit of aggression towards this Gold Fury. Tense moments on the left side of the map, but Trelly, maybe the Bolts not feeling comfortable with their ability to force a fight.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm a bit surprised the Bolts are playing scared here. I mean, they have so many advantages. The one disadvantage that I will say is the fact that Lasbra has kill potential onto 2 characters at the moment. He could look towards BMT and he could look towards Jarkor. With both relics available, even that is pretty sketchy. So that's probably the call. Lasbra's like, I'm not strong yet. Of course, you guys are all doing great, and yeah, Barracuda's got 2 crit items. He's hitting hard. But this Loki can't be the impact player that the Olympus Bolts want, so that's why we're not seeing that pull onto the Fury just yet. The Camelot Kings are still showing presence towards it, and it looks like Variety made his way over to the left side as well. Captain Twig gonna start the pull.
I mean, this is just such a Kings type of call. I mean, we're a bit behind on the left side of the map, but we're gonna be the team to pull the Fury and the team to get it. Jake takes a bit of pressure off of the Kings with the pull. Up in the air goes Variety, and he's found Lasbra over in mid. Trelly, I gotta think that's a dropped ball here for the Bolts. I mean, you have a 2-level lead for Barra and a fully completed Wind Demon over just the tier 2 Blade there for Yark. And the Kings are the team that have been able to rotate over, pick up the Gold Fury, and get out alive. And now, Mego grab the Pyro.
Yeah, and they should. Baskin and Lasbra are here, but it doesn't look like they've got too much steal potential. Both of these are going to go down. I mean, Ven had ultimate.
Yeah, Earthshaker's down.
It seemed like he didn't want to use I'm a Monster because when you cast it, you stand still and probably would have died. But stealing that Fury is certainly something that could have been worth it. And it looks like the Olympus Bolts just decide to roll over. They're not going to fight that one. They still have the gold lead in their favor, and Barra still does have that massive lead over and left.
Yeah.
But take a look at the XP. VMT starting to look a little bit better in lane. He still has that level lead over Ven. Genetics had a level lead over Awesome Jake a bit ago as well. They're still able to find farm throughout the map. And just the fact that the Bolts didn't want to fight, maybe they are just waiting for Lasbra to get online. That could be the call. He will do crazy damage late game. He's just not online yet.
Right. Not doom and gloom for the Bolts by any means. Just figured we could potentially see more, especially over on left. A couple things around Jake, especially with the Emperor's Armor. I thought that might be indicative of like, okay, we're W keying now. We've got Emperor's Armor, second item on Ares. We're going. Now also picks up the Blink. And so I'm doubling down on that mindset where I'm hoping and maybe expecting to see Jake get a bit more aggressive over the next couple of minutes. See if the Bolts are able to play around that. But I want to recontextualize this for the Bolts and maybe zoom out. We talked about potential missed opportunity, but really for the Bolts and their composition. Are they comfortable getting into later on points of this game, even with the Camelot Kings? Do you feel like they scale well enough compared to the Kings that you don't need to force early objectives? Is that maybe the mindset we're seeing?
Yeah, I would say that Ven, Lasbra, and Baskin are only going to get better as the game goes on. Ares certainly loses that potency. You're probably never fully channeling that ultimate or getting a pull because of how quickly you can just get blown up with Variety having Sunder and Genetics having the Frenzy. Ares is not going to have that same level of effectiveness, but if you're putting all that weight onto your late game Loki and Scylla and the setup from the Athena, then that's just fine. Donza, of course, is an ADC, but Cupid scales a little bit better. This is a Fire Giant pull.
At 18.
18 minutes in. Bear's nowhere close.
Earthshaker. Oh, that's a double taunt from Baskin. Variety low. That's forced the retreat from the Fire Giant. Kings empty-handed at the moment, giving the Bolts the opportunity to rotate over. That was a potentially game-breaking call there for the Camelot Kings. Another double taunt from Baskin this time. Jake is followed up, a double pull. I'm a Monster. Maybe clips Genetics, but Big Man Tings just fine. Aegis burnt off of the Vulcan. That being said, a double dunk from Variety and a double stun on the wall. The follow-up from the Kings has been fantastic. And the wall from Genetics sends the Bolts out around the side. Baskin will be the lone one to drop. The Camelot Kings they got initiated on, but they turned the script.
Yeah, Lasbra still hanging on to that ultimate, just didn't see the opportunity. They got BMT's beads immediately off that fight. Awesome Jake had the blink pull, pulls that Vulcan back in, but the I'm a Monster gets Aegis out. After that, it seemed like the Olympus Bolts didn't have the dive. Barracuda rocketed in, but Captain Twig ultimate perfectly just for the CC immunity. And then again, Lasbra just didn't even decide to use that ultimate. Found there was no way that he could get aggressive. Maybe onto Captain Twig. Ults him, does get the beads down. Now he's going to have to run away. Variety had a fantastic dunk in, though. Ben almost got 100-0 through Relics with that ultimate. But the Olympus Bolts are sticking around here. They're trying to find something. The Camelot Kings, they're just fine with that fight.
Outside of Yark, the Kings missing their beads capabilities right now, right? This Cupid, a little less safe. So I wonder... Now the Bolts are saying, okay, we've seen Baskin strip a couple sets of beads away. He's been effective on this Athena so far. And then Jake, as we've hoped, as we asked for, did provide some good follow-up on either beads that were down or stripping those beads away himself in that previous fight. So we saw the kind of 1-2 punch between the Athena and the Ares. Are the Bolts now going to be aggressive and force that again over the next 30 to 45 to a minute is then the big question, because then those beads are going to be coming back up. You're going to have to hope for a run back of that same fight, just a different outcome one more time. Now the Gold Fury is about to respawn here, Trey, and I wonder if the Bolts got to be living with the Camelot Kings early FG attempted pull in the back of your head. Got to try to establish better ward coverage or at least knowledge of where the Kings are, because they can do the objective quick.
They certainly can. And if the Bolts are solely relying on that engage from Awesome Jake, it's going to get worse and worse. They don't have a Phantom Shell. If Genetics is just able to wall off that no escape, pop the Sunder, pop the Frenzy, and blow up this Ares late game, it's really going to hurt. Variety to the skies, but immediately the Bolts are all backing up.
Bolts nowhere in range of the Anvil of Dawn, except Baskin is. Oni Fury dropped to half and then dropped by the Kings. Crush, no good. Variety out. Uses his sets of beads. So now this Thor with no ult, no beads, more susceptible to the full suite of ultimates. And then, of course, the taunt from Baskin that the Bolts have. We've now regained control of this Fury Pit, but the Kings close by. And this game on a knife edge at 21.5 minutes, trailing. No team with a real tangible lead, 1,000 or so for the Kings, but spread out over the squad. And Assassinate onto Variety. Crush! Sick 'em! I'm a monster at all hits, but it's Barracuda who deals a killing blow. How many can Jake get? None is the answer. Ults, beads, all of it used by the Kings. But ultimate's all down for the Olympus Bolts.
Yeah, I'm amazed that Variety hammers in there. I saw the play. If you're able to wall out Lasbra, maybe you force out that ultimate, but I guess he forgot his beads were down, and the rest of the Olympus Bolts immediately collapse onto that one. This is a bad call. You're losing Fire Giant if you go for this, but it looks like Yarkor, he's not even there to go for the FG, so they have to go for Pyro. The Olympus Bolts get the Oni Fury for free. You got to imagine if Cupid's there, that Fire Giant's gone. Lasbra can't defend it without his ult by himself, but he was a little bit too little too late, so the Camelot Kings just grabbed the secondary prize in the Pyromancer.
Would you have preferred an immediate FG pull there by the Bolts? You think a one-man advantage would have been enough to pull the big one?
It seemed like the call was, hey, Lasbra will go and just make sure that we have the vision, and we'll go for Oni Fury because don't feel confident enough going for the Fire Giant with BMT around. He still has his Aegis, that sort of thing, but sending 4 over in a weak Loki still seemed like the Camelot Kings could have shredded through that Fire Giant extremely quick with a Vulcan turret and an Earthshaker. But they missed their opportunity, and now the lead is still in favor of the Camelot Kings, just a bit gold-wise. It's going to start to add up, though. You got to keep your eyes on those relics. Awesome Jake, his ultimate's coming back up, and BMT's beads and Variety's beads down for another minute.
Barracuda hits like a truck right now. Double shurikens, Deathbringer. Unless I'm not seeing straight. No Spectral Armor's picked up for the Camelot Kings just yet. Great opportunity for Barracuda to find some good damage if he's able to find that space to operate. Now, good news for the Kings and their fans. Yark has started to catch back up a bit in this game. Only the one level down now to Barracuda, and at least item slot-wise, fully caught up in that regard as well. I'm not going to do the math on the expensive nature of both of those builds. But the Bolts still have an opportunity to play around their AD carry. And we've seen how the Rocket in those fights can supply additional lockdown in CC. I do think on the flip side, though, Trey, the Kings have done a good job where when beads and CC immune ult have been burnt, delaying out the game and not allowing the Bolts to then force something on the back end of that.
Yeah, looks like maybe the call was to try and go for Baskin, but Baskin not too afraid. You got 4 Kings on the right side of the map looking for some possible relic burn onto Baskin, but those beads weren't available and Fields of Love did not get dropped. So now 5v5 situation towards the Fire Giant. All relics will be available for this one once Baskin's beads do come up. But the question is, who's going to be the first initiator? Typically, it's been dash taunt from Athena, try and pull a relic. If so, Awesome Jake's blinking in. That hasn't been too difficult to pull off for the Olympus Bolts, but Genetics has a tough job because he has to consistently wall off that taunt, and if he's not, someone on his team is burning a relic.
Are you ever a fan of just the random like blink ult in from an Ares, even if your team doesn't intend on fighting, to see if you can get some beads down, or do you feel like that's just way too risky of a play? Like Jake just blinks forward, drops ult, maybe gets some beads off the Kings, tries to run away. Or do you think there's potentially value in just random aggression, seeing if you can set up some beads for the next fight?
If it's targeted randomness, then yes. Like if you're blinking in just randomly, no. But if you know the wall's down or if Variety's not there to sunder you, then yeah, you can
I'm the first one. I'm just going in and...
Yeah, you got to make sure key abilities are down and just blink in. I wouldn't be surprised. Awesome Jake bolsters defenses. This could be that play you're talking about, but did not decide to go for it. He does have the root sprint as well, so he's got some of his own CC to try and help him get in or out of this engagement. Looks like the call here for the Bolts is to group up at least for that tier 2, or tier 1 tower rather. And Ven was able to get Polynomicon, so has that burst potential for sure coming from this Scylla. That's going to be the first. There it is.
Nice.
Beats down from Variety. Still has Anvil of Dawn though.
Uh-oh. Jake on the other side of Genetics wall. Get stunned, we'll get locked down, we'll get rooted, we'll get killed. The Bolts have lost their support before the fight even started. Variety's in the back line, he'll clean up Ven. Barracuda drops for a BMT double. The Kings clean sweep the mid to left side of the Bolts roster, and it looks like they'll grab the Fire Giant as well.
I mean, this is certainly what I was worried about for late game as Lasbra tries to take the 1v1 versus Variety. The fact that if Awesome Jake gets walled off, he's dead. I thought he had a bit more time before he hit that point, but unfortunately the Camelot Kings, off of the shred from Yarkor and the burst damage from BMT, said, hey, you're at that point. Ares no longer exists. Unfortunate for you. That wall is all it takes. And if you look, Ven, Jake, and Lasbra did not ult that fight. They didn't have an opportunity. Bear and Basket were the only ones who were able to use their ultimates. And Bear essentially ulted into 4 by himself because the rest of the team was gone. Variety had a beautiful dunk onto Ven. I thought maybe was able to get out with that Sentinel, but that's not going to be the call. Lasbra could be stuck though, forced to beat real early.
Oh, Earthshaker down onto Lasbra, who assassinates back in. A great opportunity, but it's wiped off the map by Big Man Tings. And Lasbra is as well. That would have been a nice win for the Bolts. The Big Man Tings shows you that though immobile, Vulcan can still return some good damage. Now the Bolts, they're without their jungler for 45 seconds.
They are without their jungle, but unfortunately for BMT, loses both relics in that skirmish, which means there's no way they're trying to push a Phoenix down. Awesome Jake gets a pull onto that Vulcan, and there's no way that the wall from Genetics is saving you from Ven's damage. So probably a smart call to back up, get the Fury, farm up until BMT gets access to those beads, and then we can start to look towards Phoenix's. One more tier 2 tower to go through from the Camelot Kings before they can attempt to break the base of the Olympus Bolts. And this is sort of the issue with the Olympus Bolts composition. Yeah, Baskin can dash in and get the beads, but if you're not getting beads on a key target, if you're not picking up Vulcan or Cupid, it doesn't open up that many doors. You still have Anvil of Dawn to worry about, the Jousting Field from Captain Twig, and of course, Shards of Ice from Genetics. It's got to be Yarkor or BMT, and no one is able to get to the back line except for Lasbra. We saw him get both relics off of Big Man Tings, but still not able to find that kill. There's a lot of weight on this Loki's shoulders, and now the Camelot Kings pushing down left.
Sure is, yeah, no Phantom Shell has felt bad for Jake specifically. I mean, I don't know if you're picking that up instead of Root Sprint, but would feel real nice given how often this Ares has been walled off in previous fights. I didn't catch what Genetics had after the Oni Hunter Scar, but sold it and picked up an Emperor's Armor just now. The changing of the tides, of course, in this game where the Kings have roared ahead on the back end. 3 of their 5 kills, 1 fell swoop over by the Fire Giant. And Variety will go up in the air. A move moving ward. Twig is taunted in. Variety there for follow-up. But now Variety's alone. Captain Twig has been caught out by the bolts. What does that mean for the rest of this Fire Giant power play? Only about a minute left. The Kings will now lose their jungler and a bit of breathing room maybe for the bolts.
Yeah, I don't see any reason that Twig has to be that far up, especially when the rest of his team's over on left. BMT's beat's still not up. They just came back, so there was no reason to try and force a fight, no reason to try and push up, especially as a Lancelot. Like, if it's Variety, yeah, maybe you can pull a bees with the wall, but there's very little poke that a Lancelot can do underneath the Phoenix, especially by himself. So great taunt in from Baskin to capitalize on a little bit of over-aggression from the Camelot Kings. And that should be the stop of this Fire Giant. It's going to fall off in about 30 seconds or so. The Bolts have time to try and get as many upgrades as they possibly can. You can see Ven would love that Soul Reaver before the next fight. Lazaro is able to get that Bumba Spear, the serrated edge. He's got plenty of percent penetration to try and go for these one-shots. And more specifically, Captain Twig and Variety going to be without beads for another 2 minutes or so. The Olympus Bolts have opportunities now to try and get aggressive towards this EFG. They're going to have to play real quick. They have to force something now. That's why Awesome Jake, already here at this tower, he's probably got his blink hotkey, trying to see who he can find. You want to fight now.
I mean, if you're fast forwarding the clock to a world where the Kings are able to get this enhanced Fire Giant, strictly map state wise, this is as comfortable as the map is going to be for the Bolts. If the Kings are able to get another Fire Giant, in all likelihood, a Phoenix goes down, and then you're dealing with that for the rest of the game. You'd love to step up and be competitive around this enhanced Fire Giant. But a lot of this harkens back to what we were talking about early in the game with the Kings. The Bolts had this 1,000 or so gold lead. Can they force it? Then we talked about how the Kings don't mind, being a bit behind, even, going into some of those mid-game fights because they're so clean and so clinical, and it's exactly what's happened to the Bolts here in game one. A little bit of a lead. Kings don't care. They make the big play. And now it's comeback territory needed for the Olympus Bolts. I did expect the Ymir steady walking forward. Awesome Jake with a bubble, so it's going to require a bit more CC to fully kill off this Ares. Hasbro hovering just behind the Kings. Could find a sandwich opportunity here if this Loki can find its target. The enhanced Fire Giant pulled, Frenzy used, Variety goes up into the Anvil of Dawn. Jake with it all to do, unable to steal away the EFG. The Kings get it, Variety ults away. As clean as it gets, no drama from the Camelot Kings.
You could tell the Bolts wanted to step up, but the zone duty was perfect. Variety channeled the Anvil of Dawn in front of 4 Bolts, but they just didn't have the DPS to try and force anything. You could tell also Awesome Jake wanted to stay away from Variety, didn't want to get the bubble popped by the wall. But that does mean you're giving a ton of free DPS. They're going to set up an ambush here, though, Dave. It looks like they want to fight before the Phoenix comes up, and all Kings are stepping up.
Oh, no, it's Twig who's caught out, or maybe it's Awesome Jake. Will this pull anyone in? Yes, pulls in Genetics. I'm a monster onto the Ymir, but the Ymir simply shrugs it off. The Camelot Kings have been jumped on, but they've returned the favor to the Olympus Bolts. Tings on a killing spree, and that's maybe how this game ends. Venanu swept from the map. Tings with a double. Variety on a killing spree. And the Kings flex their muscles at the end of game one.
I mean, there's a certain value to the element of surprise, but when you have all your relics up and you have Enhanced Fire Giant, even if you're getting jumped before the Phoenix, you're not losing that fight. The Camelot Kings drop absolutely no one and decide the Olympus Bolts on a fight that it seemed they wanted to go for. It was their only play because they could not defend underneath their Phoenix, but great play throughout from the Camelot Kings. We highlighted the gold lead that the Bolts were able to build up for themselves, but they never forced anything. That one Oni Fury that the Camelot Kings went over, since then, they had map state control the whole time.
That's right. I mean, think about it. After beads were burnt early in the game, we never saw a second attempt at an Ares ult and duo, never saw the Loki rotate over there, try to capitalize, never saw Barracuda just sending a rocket down dual lane, seeing if you can get beads, some type of stun, some type of setup.
Yeah.
But even then, all right, so that's not capitalizing on an early lead. It's then the Fire Giant misstep that completely ends this game, effectively. That's where the Kings really build up their lead. And that's what the Kings are so good at, setting up around those mid to late game objectives.
Yeah, it just seemed like Awesome Jake being the sole initiator off the Baskin taunt was not going to work out. They could not keep that Ares alive.
Well, the Camelot Kings, they live up to the play style that they've set all year long. They'll take a 1-0 lead over the Olympus Bolts, who are trying to bounce back. Game number 2 coming up next.
Time's out, run out to use those big words, yeah. I don't need convincing at all because I know what I want. Baby, dig deep, it's time to make a move on my heart. What's it gonna take for you to love, take for you to love me? What's it gonna take for you to show, take for you to show feels, yeah. I've been trying to take it slow, but my patience low. Think it's time you let me know. What's it gonna take for you to love, take for you to love me? Yeah.
the Kings hold out through a problematic early game, and they find the late game that the Kings are expected to have at this point, right? Really good team fight and a really good win for them over the Bolts. And of course, we talked earlier, and we were mentioning the jerseys. We were talking about, of course, our friends over at Skulls Gaming who provided jerseys. We talked about the t-shirts as well. We've got something a little new for you. It's the winter months, or at least I guess at this point it's still technically late fall, but it's winter months. Ignore what the calendar says. It's getting colder, and of course, for those of you going to Worlds, it's still going to be cold in Texas. For those of you elsewhere in the world, still probably going to be cold, as long as you're in the northern hemisphere. Otherwise, you're going to need to wait until our summer, your winter, things like that. But because it's getting cold, you might need something or want something to keep you warm. Still want to rep your favorite teams? I've got great news for you. Skulls has now given us and given you team hoodies that you can wear whenever you want to rep your favorite squad. And right now, I'm happy to tell you that there's a 20% discount on all t-shirts and hoodies in the SBL store until December 5th. So you've got until this upcoming Monday to be able to get some of these hoodies. And I don't think it's guaranteed, but I believe if you can get in on these now, should be able to receive those before Worlds. So if you're going to Worlds or you want to rep them for Worlds, make sure you get in on that one. Or you can go to shop.hi-rezstudios.com/SBL or shop.smiteproleague.com and get your favorite hoodies, get some t-shirts, get a jersey if you want. Some of those are 20% off. The jerseys, not the t-shirts and hoodies are. And do it while you can. Thanks to Skulls for putting out that. I actually really, really like all the hoodies. I think having the off colors on the inside. I had said this unabashedly. I'm just a big fan of the colors of the Valkyries, everything. And so that one kind of won me over, but I think just everything, all of them, they all looked really, really good. So hopefully y'all get some. I got Mifflin on the desk with me. And we got the Kings, who maybe don't, they're feeling kind of hot-handed. Maybe they don't need the hoodies right now. They come in, Mifflin. Yeah, you didn't like that one?
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. I was getting different vibes from the face you made.
That's good stuff.
They struggle a little bit at the beginning, which is that Barra gets 1,000 gold up. I think that they're suffering a little bit. There's one kill, I believe, maybe 2 kills that the Bolts scoop up on their way. And then they do the Kings thing. They hunker down and they say, cool, let's wait until late game. And lo and behold, they do really well in the late.
Yeah, I mean, I want to give credit to the Olympus Bolts before we go into the great from the Camelot Kings, and I think it's going to be a bit reflective of the pace of this game because it went great for the Bolts and then it went great for the Kings. I love the early rotations from Baskin in particular. This is clearly a composition that the Olympus Bolts have practiced, and they've played it very, very well. Every single fight that goes to the Olympus Bolts early happens in duo. We had briefly discussed the global presence of both soul laners. Athena just goes further. She's more global than Thor. Mrs. Worldwide, if you would, said, all right, well, if I go to the mid 3v3, it's going to be a mid 4v4 because Variety be hot on my heels. What if I just teleport to the duo lane? Variety just has to, twiddle his thumbs in lane and say, all right, guys, if a fight happens in mid, I'll be there. So I love the allocation of aggression from the Olympus Bolts throughout the early. They put Barracuda in a very strong position. But from there, Barracuda kind of hung out in lane for a bit too long, I think. Didn't really spread the wealth across the map. And the Camelot Kings, as you said, do the Camelot Kings thing, which is, all right, we'll just play for the late game team fight. We'll make it back up in neutral farm. Some small counter matchups made it very difficult. A couple of picks that Genetics was able to line up on Awesome Jake in particular around the Fire Giant just really opened the door for the Camelot Kings. Captain Twig, I don't know how I forgot to bring this up on the desk, but can't Ares ult that guy. He hops on the horse. He's immune to it. You'll stun him in place, but he's stunned like 100 meters away because he rode a horse away. You're not pulling him in. So Twig was very safe through the majority of this game. Variety has a standout performance, I think. Some of those Thor walls, very, very strong. Yarkor rotated a bit slower to some of these team fights. Wasn't as, gung-ho, didn't want to get involved in the 4v4s in mid or the 5v4s that the Camelot Kings had inflicted on him. But by the time the Yarkor did start rotating, the fight got a lot better for the Camelot Kings. I think this one really was decided by a couple of engagements. Had the Olympus Bolts been able to leverage that lead a little bit more so throughout the early, I think they would have held on to it very well. They had a composition that could really, really burn through these objectives. But because they sat on their lead for a little bit too long, the Camelot Kings eventually were able to spool up and run away with it.
I also think, and I didn't even realize it until the end there, because it felt like there were so many times that Big Man Tings almost died that I was almost certain he had to have a death. 4-0-4, untouched. And most importantly, one of those highlights was specifically a turnaround where you saw Twig get the kill, but so many times that he was so close but just not killed off. I think well played by the Kings. Maybe a teensy bit of luck sprinkled on top there to make sure that Tings got out alive every time safely. Well, safe-ishly. And we'll see what the Bolts allow the Kings to do here. Again, in game number 2, Bolts are going to be your first pick a second time. Danzaburo first pick froze our minds. I think PBM tweeted out that it melted his brain as well. Just put everybody on stall for a moment. Bear looked good on it, though. You have to give him that credit.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it a lot. It's technically my job, right? Analyst for SMITE. So once I went back there, I was thinking, what does Danzaburo in first pick really do for you? It controls the enemy draft pretty well in that you know the Camelot Kings are going to draft walls. Because that's what deals with Danzaburo for the most part. He wants to go to the rocket, throw a wall behind him, or he wants to engage some of these fights. Wall is very, very good against this pick and very good against the Ares as well. So the Olympus Bolts at least had knowledge of what the Camelot Kings were looking to do themselves. That's a bit of value in of itself. And if you think Danzaburo is a top pick, if you think he's strong regardless of his counter selections, that makes sense to me. I don't think you can leave that game at the feet of Barracuda. I thought he had a very, very strong performance. Baskin as well, and the Athena, I think, had a very strong performance as well. So at least 2 picks I wouldn't be surprised to see from the Olympus Bolts again. Whether or not Danzaburo needs to be a first pick overall, I'm not exactly there.
Well, we'll see. I guess if he feels confident enough back to it. Again, I don't know. The Kings are going to pick it up, so I don't know that you need to be too worried about getting it, like you said, maybe first pick. Probably top 3, just because bottom 2 bans would be pretty easy. The Kings thinking about what they want to take away. Bans from the Bolts. It's the Naja, the Kernanos, the Emoja. Other side, Daji, the Nox. Now they're just trying to figure out what their third and what their last one will be.
They're thinking, do we need to ban the Dans? Does it need to be taken off the table?
Does it have to be dealt with? And I guess a lot of that, I mean, if you're looking for comfort, maybe thrown, I was going to say towards hardcore, you could go that route. They don't seem to think that that's the route they need to. Instead, they ban the Cupid, which is maybe more in line with what we would have expected. And Mifflin, they go right back to it. Danzaburo, locked in, number 1.
Yeah, so Kings, one of these 2 picks probably just going to be Ymir, right? Like, let's get back on that. That was one of the strongest picks that we had into it in the previous match. If the Olympus Bolts want to go back towards a mobile supports, we're going to have a win condition in the late game, which is throwing a wall behind Jake or behind Danzaburo and just all in engaging from there. I think it is pretty likely if the Kings don't take Ymir here that the Bolts could take it for themselves. Jake's certainly no stranger to that pick, so it's up to Genetics on whether or not he wants to move in towards that. The other pick I thought was in a bit more of a state of flux. They could have flexed elsewhere. I maybe thought Thor could be a selection this high up as well, considering, again, Wall's very strong, a little bit of global presence, but instead, why change things?
Yeah.
Vulcan, it looked good.
You nailed this one perfectly. Maui locked in here for the Bolts. I know Aggro was very happy when he got to see his god come out and get a nice 2-0. Bolts putting that up to either see if it'll be up 3 or if it'll be a 2-1. Maui was real. I mean, it was fun to watch, right? I mean, you cast it
good.
Like he's got a lot in the kit.
It is. I think the primary strength of Maui. I mean, if we're gonna be like really basic, it's the amount of CC that he has.
Yeah.
But I think the nature of his CC is what really elevates Maui over a lot of these other picks. It's non-committal initiation. I'm gonna reel you in from a range, pull you to me. I'm gonna pull you with my ultimate and throw a wall where you used to be. Things like that, where you're forcing beads without necessarily dedicating your body. And if you force your beads from range, he's got the ability to gap close with leap. It's a stun into a pool, guaranteed every single time thanks to his passive, and it really is just an immense amount of lockdown. You've got strong disengage post-leap just by throwing your teleport at your own feet, giving over movement speed, essentially just a full disengage not only for yourself, but for any allies that happen to be in range as well. Maui is a very strong pick. I think this god is incredibly good, asterisk, when it's piloted by the top players in the world, right? It is high execution. He is not allowed to act as a solo agent, but when he has got a team that is in comms, communicating, and playing well around him, what Maui brings to your team is incredibly valuable. What I had said during the cast is, I think he's Yamoja Light. I think he's going to be another incredibly high execution Guardian that the pros are going to have a field day with.
Now here's the question, And, you know, before I guess I get back into that, I will just give the update. Ishtar locked in for Kings. Scylla, Discordia, banned out by the Kings. Tyr, Lancelot, banned out by the Bolts. We were talking a lot about Jake going into game number 1. A lot of, hey, this has been great, this is not. You mentioned that it needs its high execution threshold. We know Jake has had a good Umoja in the past. We know that Jake's top end is incredibly high up there. But the problem is that we haven't been getting Jake's top end. Do you think that this is going to be a good look for the Bolts? Or do you think it's going to have a lot of, or kind of fall flat on its face just because of the fact that we haven't been seeing that level of performance from them consistently?
It's hard to say, right? It's a brand new god, and it's one that, even though I draw the comparison to what Umoja brings, it's not exactly
not the same
comparable
kit
in
at all.
execution. So we'll have to see whether or not Jake is comfortable on this pick. It's incredibly strong, though. I'm not absolutely certain of this fact, so fact checker, you can keep me in line. It's not a stats thing, but I don't believe the sake from Danzaburou DRs. So the CC lockdown of Maui plus Danzaburou can be incredibly strong. Regardless, the CC lockdown's going to be there just by nature of Maui being a one-man CC machine. But it is certainly a duo lane that has got high kill pressure. And against now a pick with Ishtar locked in on the other side, that hasn't exactly got the strongest escape options. If you can get behind Ishtar, her dash is incredibly difficult to use. I'd argue even more difficult to use as an escape than like Lacerate from Medusa. Ymir largely immobile as well. Could be that the Olympus Bolts put a lot of pressure towards that duo, and a jungler like Pele is generally a pick that they like to put pressure in duo with.
That being said, we just saw them put a lot of pressure in duo. And I mean, it goes back to what Lasber was saying in his interview, right? When we listened to it, you look at how this team's been playing, early leads, big leads even. Some to the point where almost killing the Titan has happened. And yet a lot of games that they should have won that they didn't. I'm thinking of a 55-minuter against the Leviathans a couple of weeks ago. They go the distance, they're winning 95% of the game. They do all but the last fight. Things like that. So maybe we'll see what the Bolts have to offer. I'm excited to see what this lineup can do. Very physical heavy outside of the Yu Huang, but Yu Huang's a good mid to maybe balance that out. Meanwhile, when you look at the Kings, they're just playing the Kings, right? I mean, they like the Ishtar is maybe the spiciest pick on that, and given the meta, it's not really that spicy, but you get the Hunbats, the Osiris as well, maybe something that's been a little more out of meta lately, but something Variety has gone back to. Do you think that the Kings have been able to draft something outside of the top 3 that deals a little better with what the Bolts have? And again, I guess maybe looking towards that team fight.
Team fight phase, bottom 2 looks real good for the Camelot Kings, right? Like Osiris is just going to get into that back line, have infinite defense because it's not Osiris jungle, which I think we've become accustomed to seeing recently. Instead, that is likely Osiris in the soul lane, so not only defense in build, but damage mitigation from passive as well as the tether, so he's going to be very, very difficult to deal with. You've got Captain Twig on his Hun bots. Fear No Evil is going to set up for Earthshaker very well. I love the Camelot Kings draft. I think they've got a lot of team fight presence. If the pace of game is similar to game 1, I would almost just give this like 70% odds to Camelot Kings. But the Olympus Bolts have got a lot of pressure that they can bring early. Yu Huang, level 1 through 4, very good at establishing pressure. Pele at every portion of the game is going to be a threat. High mobility as well, so it'll be a difficult task for Captain Twig to maintain pace with Pele. You've got a duo lane, kill pressure lane as well. I want to see the Olympus Bolts getting active early on. That's not to say that their late game composition is poor. It's high execution, but it's still certainly very good. I think the Camelot Kings have got ease of play and a slight edge in the late game, though. So I would much prefer to see the Olympus Bolts strike first.
I know it speaks to the success of the Kings maybe in Phase 3, but they did not lose a game while Twig was on Hunbats, and that feels like it's a good note for them to have going into this one. Again, the Bolts trying to revolt against their history with this team so far this year. We'll see, can they push us to 3, or will the Kings find the second 2-0 of the day? We got Dave and Trelly standing by one more time.
Remember me this time, Gore. I appreciate you. And that's going to give me the momentum I need to bring it here for game number 2. And I think the desk sets it up really nicely there, Trelly. And really, when you just look at the history around these two teams, the Bolts have taken games off the Kings this year. The Bolts are yet in what, 6 previous matchups to win a set against the Camelot Kings. Now would be a great time to change that up, right?
Oh,
Give
no.
yourself a chance to qualify. Give yourself first blood, maybe. Variety jumped on by 5. Miff said he wants the Bolts to strike first. That's one way to do it. Clock still counting down, and first blood to the Bolts.
They really did it to him, man. Variety.
That's game over. Might as well, right?
I mean,
Go next.
He was even trying to get his passive ready. You could see if he was spamming abilities on the way over, and he lost all that work. So yeah, Variety gonna give first blood there. That's one of the strengths of Mally, though. Not only the stun to start off, but also the pull back in after the CC. Really just make sure to lock in a character like that. And Genetics has to reset the buff because of Jake going for the pull. I have to imagine that the Hog will come through, and it will not. Genetics able to take that one away.
I think it did.
No, it did, but it didn't confirm.
But it did not confirm it. Wow, so a small win then for the Camelot Kings. This would be nice, though. Jake pulls back Genetics. Barracuda will not have enough damage. So Purpleness are the Olympus Bolts to start off this duo lane. A duo lane that went really, really well for the Bolts in game number 1 here, Trellian. They're sticking with the Donza. My goodness, Barra's taking a lot of damage from Yark. Just a support kind of skirmish on one side of the lane. Yark with the 1 level lead over Barra wins that damage battle. Do you think the lane changes a bit from what we saw for the Bolts now that there's a Maui there?
Yeah, I would say so. Awesome Jake is trying to get consistent with just setting up the stun into the pull, that sort of aggression, but unfortunately because that buff was invaded, Barracuda not hitting level 2 for quite some time, so the Camelot Kings are trying to hold that wave as far back as possible. Without level 2, Barracuda really doesn't want to step up and try and fart with the Yarkor. There we go, he finally got it, so now maybe some aggression towards that ADC, but it's just a little bit difficult. Genetics could be the target though, they've got plenty of CC.
Lasbra battle it out with Twig over one of the Oracles. Genetics still level 1, but it's Jake and Barra that are backpedaling. It's because Yarkor has got plenty of damage, and Genetics has med as well. That was the old-fashioned med bait. The Bolts don't fall for it. Not just the experience lead for Yark that's made the damage over on left. Of course, in these type of scenarios, the Kings do have to try to maximize awareness, maximize your ward coverage with the vision shard. Because when you're able to push up this far in lane, you are susceptible to maybe Lasbra making an early rotation over.
I think Lasbra's really the only one that could make that early rotation, just because Captain Twig is on the Hunbats, doesn't get that much early gank potential. You got the stun on the jump, but that's about it. As far as early pressure goes, Captain Twig, not the jungler you expect to go ahead and try and get active, that sort of thing. Awesome Jake was able to steal that one away, has the Scepter, another pull back in. Looks like not going for Genetics though, it's Variety, who's once again under a little bit of fire, but here comes Captain Twig.
Variety around the wall from Baskin. Twig will teleport in as well. Baskin, of course, getting first bloods, you automatically get a little extra gold lead to start off the game, and then a slight experience lead for Baskin as well. I mean, Trelly in all likelihood doesn't totally change or end the laning phase for Variety here, but suppose the earlier you get that Anvil of Dawn online, even if it's just a half level or so earlier, maybe can make something work if Lasbra happens to be hovering on right.
Certainly could start to open up some doors, but I don't think too much fighting is going to be happening until Lasbra decides to get active, and he definitely should be, but Baskin is chasing Twig all the way.
Oh, the
beautiful wall.
Oh, the wall is great, but Twig
one more double tap, that's what he needs.
jumping away. Baskin will have his hammer in 1 second. He tosses it out. Hits the 1, not the 2. Twig will jump away, remain safe. The Bolts fans are loving this. They're loving seeing Baskin get aggressive on the Thor. Not so much loving what you've been seeing on the left side of the map since the start of the game, where Yark with that slight experience lead, because he got the purple, Barracuda did not. Kings have had constant pressure flowing into Jake, flowing into Barracuda. But luckily for the Bolts, hasn't caused that wide of a gap in gold or XP.
Because Baskin got first blood, he's got the gold, yes, but the XP, not so much. He chased Captain Twig through his own jungle for a full wave. Lasbra cleared that, so Baskin doesn't have level 5. Finally does tick over. He's going to be behind XP-wise for at least a little bit, missing that wave, which will open up some opportunity for Variety to get active over in this lane. It looks like both going for the teleport, both going for the hammer start. You know, the Rune Forge for Baskin for sure, but I think Variety's got a couple different options. You could go Sledge, Blackthorn, Frostbound. You can go any of them, really. It's Osiris. He's that, you know, susceptible to any one of those items. But I think as far as Baskin goes, he's trying to poke, stay back, and then fight the Squishy. He's not going to be trying to box up against an Osiris anytime soon. And it looks like because Lasper's also started the beads, is putting a little bit of respect on Captain Twitch. Fear no evil, incredible amounts of CC in the early. If he wanted to get active, which he usually doesn't, you got to give a little bit of respect there. So the beads, that's going to help out as well if Lasper wants to try and fight.
Now, if you're the Bolts, looking at this team comp, Baskin was effective through, you know, first 20 or so minutes, getting the taunt in, taking away beads. This Runeforged Thor, something we saw the Dragons run a few weeks ago. They had triple assassin on that roster, but it was the overwhelming dive comp that seemingly worked. And so now the Bolts dialing that back a bit, but you still are likely getting this Runeforged Thor. You've got Lasper on the Pele, but then Ven on a very different pick from what we saw in Game 1, Trelly. Do you think the dynamic for Ven really changes this game on the Yu Huang?
Yeah, you can kind of send out Yu Huang ultimates your own. I think as a Scylla player, you're waiting for setup. I'm a Monster is extremely telegraphed and kind of difficult to hit on your own, especially if the Camelot Kings can hear it or they know it's coming. Yu Huang, you can sort of position the dragons however you want. You can lead a fight with dueling dragons and you'll be just fine. So Ven has a lot more control of how the team fight's gonna go. But still, you'd like to wait for Awesome Jake to hit a massive island or Lasper to come in with volcanic lightning in the background before you're sending out those abilities. You're trying to find some distractions. But it looks like a little bit of an invade here. Lasbra sees it, doesn't want to step in though.
Kings pull the Greater Scorpion. Lasbra sends damage towards Genetics, who will use the med once again. It's an ult from Jake, hoping to pull back one. Twig blinks forward, immediately rooted by Ven. And the wall up from Genetics. That's massive dueling dragons out of Ven in the mid lane. But big man Tings, he's equaled the mid ultimate pressure and returned to the favor. Lord of the Afterlife, that'll root two. That'll chase down Ven. And the Kings have flipped the script. They will win the 2v1.
That's some big damage as well for Big Man Tings, and it looks like all the while Yarkor was taking a 1v1 versus Barracuda underneath his own tower. Didn't get the relic or the ultimate, but Yarkor did use it out. Either way though, a little bit off the mark there, you could tell. Awesome Jake wanted to get the beats down from BMT and did, but was not able to wall him off over in the right lane there, trying to get between the tier 1 tower. So that is going to be a big swing in favor of the Camelot Kings. They've got the pressure. Usually around 10 minutes is when they like to fight because they know that Pyromancer is going to be up. Getting a kill onto Variety, certainly going to help as well. Does go for the Rune Forge, a level 9 on the Osiris, level 10 for the Vulcan. They've got XP leads galore, and they're fine fighting with these.
Yeah, the 2-4-1 is what the Camelot Kings use now for leverage going into the next couple of minutes of this game. And it was even a really nice read from Ven. Twig blinks forward, and the first thing that's awaiting is a root from Venenu. But then still gets the Fear No Evil off, and then despite a massive dueling dragons, Bolts fall by the wayside a bit. Over on the right side skirmish. Luckily, Pyromancer not there, otherwise, better believe Kings are on it. And that feels like a bit of a Tings difference there, where the Earthshaker rolls in, now the one extra kill for BMT. Gotta consider it if you're the Bolts later on, especially over the next few minutes. Now the Kings potentially looking to get out of a solo lane gank, but I'm not sure Variety's going to be able to. Anvil of Dawn cuts off the escape path, and that'll be a clean one for Lasbra. So now there's Pele. An extra kill now, 2 in the game for Laz, and another one onto Variety, trying to keep this Osiris down.
Yeah, I think Variety plays that about as well as you can, holding on to that Lord of the Afterlife, but Baskin also plays it as well as you can, holding on to that Anvil of Dawn, saying, hey, my Pele's got the damage to kill you whether you like it or not, so I'm going to stand up here and just cover in case you make it all the way to tower line. Did not, and that's where your over-aggression can sometimes cost you. You can tell that Variety's winning lane, but when Lasper comes over, could be some trouble. Barra forced into the beads there. Great ultimate from Genetics and Yarkor to make sure that he's a little bit less safe over in this lane. And now takes over to level 10. The XP throughout the map in favor of the Camelot Kings. They're fighting all the farm that they can. And it looks like probably an opportunity for them to force a fight over on the left side, even though Ven's here. If Big Man Ting shows up, probably a fight the Olympus Bolts don't want to take.
Well, Ting's over on his red for now. It's Van, the mid laner, who is slightly listing his way towards the left side. Wondering if we would see a Jake pull back. But again, Yark so threatening, even without that ultimate from him and Genetics. Bolts don't want to overextend, not just yet. But you're already starting to glance back to the way that Game 1 went, and the Kings and their comfort playing from even or behind. Now, when you give the Kings the opportunity to play aggressively because they're ahead already, before we're even looking at objectives, it can get very, very threatening. And even Variety, who's been slowed down this game, still equal in levels with Baskin. I imagine we'll see that pressure continue. So the question is, Trilly, if you're the Bolts, are you hoping to gas pedal right now? You need to pull back some of this gold, or are you still feeling like you can take a deep breath and we're not alarm bells just yet?
I definitely think the Bolts should be trying to find some aggression through Lasbra and Baskin. Specifically, the left side of the map, as far as I'm concerned, is gone. There's no way that you're comboing to kill Yarkor at the moment, especially with how closely Genetics has been sitting on the left side of the map. But looking towards Variety is certainly possible. I mean, he doesn't have beads for another level or so. With Lord of the Afterlife forced, it could be some trouble. But it looks like at the moment the Pyromancer is what both of these teams are looking towards. Good monkey toss in from Captain Twig. Didn't decide to take it though. Looks like the Trebuchet pushed up, and that was all the Olympus Bolts wanted to get off of this. They're going to grab their own Scorpion. But they're not going to find anything just yet. Genetics wants to find the wall, but isn't going to look for it.
Well, takes the Baskin wall, but Baskin just off the mark on a hammer double tap. That'll give positioning to the Camelot Kings. And what do the Kings do with that space? It's an early pyro pull, as you'd expect, and an Earth Shaker to confirm it. Jake has used his ult here, but so has Genetics. Dueling Dragons, where does it go? Won't be on to Tings, who's been dunked on by Baskin. Captain Twig still with the Fear No Evil. That's more space control, disengage potentially, and the Kings have gotten the Pyromancer cleanly.
Yeah, it seemed like the Fear No Evil was for Peel, but I don't think it needed to be. The rest of the team was out. The Olympus Bolts were not able to find anything else there. All the while, Barracuda makes the rotation over to mid, trying to grab that tier 1 tower. That opens up the left lane for Yarkor to find some farm. The fight's not over, though. It's still just trickling through. The blue buff invade is clean, and now Yark and Barra gonna take a little bit of a 1v1 with those mid laners not too far behind. It's just gonna be the Pyromancer going the way of the Camelot Kings. Some relics down for sure. I mean, BMT loses the beads, and Genetics does have to pop that meditation, but looks like not too bad. If the Camelot Kings were just trying to get the objective, get out, and not lose anyone, they succeed. They're going to be able to back up.
When you mentioned the blue buff invade, add that on top. Also, Yark stole away purple from Barracuda, who's now 2 levels behind, has beads, needs them. Relatively easy to read as the ult, and it's blocked by Captain Twig. What a read from the Hunbats. And another one for the Kings. And now it's the Kings duo lane, the Kings ADC that's extending the lead in the first 12 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, and this is the reason. I mean, I talked about it, Lasbra, possibly getting caught out, but the fact that this Ymir can block out the Donza Rocket, pretty much anyone can block it out if you're able to get in front of that character. So Barra unfortunately loses the beads, and then his life was not able to fly out of that one. But now the Camelot Kings are postured towards this Gold Fury. Are they going to go for the pull? They've got Earthshaker and the turret, plenty of DPS, but it looks like they're looking for one more pick before they do decide to commit to it. They're not going to go for any play that's not calculated. They are going to back up. Despite finding the kill on the Barracuda over on the left side, they're not going to go for that objective. But that's the aggression I've been waiting for from Captain Twig. He's had the ability to make plays like that, and Yarkor has had the aggression over in this lane to force Barra up. It was just a question of when. Captain Twig finally finds his opportunity. Beautiful block there on that rocket.
Yark has slotted into this Kings team quite nicely, hasn't he? I mean, we were wondering there'd be some build-up time. That's a pick for the Olympus Bolts. Happens as soon as it starts. Now Captain Twig, I was about to hype him up and say he's synergized well with Yark on that play. You'd wonder if there was some time where that needed to get warmed up. Now Twig will have to think about his next play while sitting back in base. Decent little pick there for the Olympus Bolts. But the continued pressure from Yark and Genetics here, Trelly, it's an awesome look for the Kings and their fans. You're talking about a team gearing up. Regardless of what happens this weekend, you'd assume they'll qualify to Worlds one way or another. Strong duo lane one of their many, many win conditions. Genexo's gonna get jumped on again. That's a med forced out once more by this Ymir. Then a defensive dueling Dragons. Jake simply been left alone. And Shards of Ice will set up a kill for Yark, and it's right around the Gold Fury. Devastating timing now for the Olympus Bolts.
Yeah, Baskin's nowhere close. He's not going to be able to help this one out of his variety. Just zones out Ben and Lasbra at their own red buff. Could try and collapse onto this Osiris, but it's not going to be easy. And here comes Big Man Tanks.
Earthshaker onto Baskin. And up goes Baskin. And away goes Baskin. Vera joining the party a bit late on the rocket. Twig has finished off the kill. I didn't even see him. Oh, that's heartbreaking for the Olympus Bolts. Twig dies, is not in the fight, flies under the radar, and then drops a double right on top of the Olympus Bolts. We are starting to spiral. Now, the Bolts had a 5v4 advantage because they picked off Twig. Not only do they then lose Jake, but then Twig respawns and adds 2 more kills for himself, a 3-level lead over Lasbra. The Kings officially rolling and off to a great, great mid-game start here in Game 2.
5,000 gold, that's pretty crazy, with 10,000 XP. That's where this really starts to add up here. I mean, just so much in favor of the Camelot Kings. And here's was Captain Twig, knowing the engage was coming through. He checked out where Baskin was going to ult out,
smart.
saved the blink ultimate, and catches some lazy backing.
That's just smart. Now we have seen back-to-back moments where there are great veteran, smart-minded plays from Twig. Blocking Bera's ult over in the dual lane, again, simple, but the presence of mind, knowing that that's the fight win condition. And then Twig was over on the right side of the map, farming up anyway. And clearly that's good communication from the rest of the Kings saying, yo, you might be able to pick them up if they rotate over to the speed buff. It's exactly what happens. And a great, great look there from Twig and likely some communication from the rest of this Kings roster. Now, Kings from even, Kings from behind, they're still considering these objectives on right. But, you know, maybe a bit slower around it. Kings this far ahead. Trell, you have to imagine they just take what they want. And with no Fury for the next 3 minutes, Bolt's got to be worried about a very, very early FG in Game 2.
Certainly do. The damage the Olympus Bolts have, unfortunately, just can't stack up. If you're looking at Big Man Tings, you're looking at a level 17 Vulcan. Is the level 12 Pele going to be able to pressure out the level 17 Vulcan? Not really, no. I mean, Baskin has the opportunity. He's level 16. He's got some damage. But Tings has been, I mean, this whole set has been able to hold on to his relics pretty much consistently. Even when it was Athenaton into Ares ult, Big Man Tings was not dying on this Vulcan. And the job is only more difficult here for the Olympus Bolts. So trying to get to the Vulcan got to be step number 1. But if that's not possible, find some farm. And maybe even, I think the Bolts are in territory to already give up this Fire Giant, you know? Split push the rest of the map away. If Yarkor rotates out, Baron needs to stay over and left. This has been the only pick they've been able to find, and Captain Twig just uses that ultimate and jumps away.
Lasbra uses his ult as well, so eye for an eye. Baskin drops down in mid, and Twig will blink away. 3-level difference in jungle, 3 in mid, 2 in carry. 2 in support. Solo laners are equal. Bolts have fallen heavily behind. And that's a massive damage difference right there. You know, Lasbra equal in levels with Twig. Now 4 levels behind, but 3 at the time of that fight. May be able to find a kill. Tings is going to get pulled back, but how much damage can really be found? Not enough. Earthshaker will drop at his feet. The Bolts have chosen this for themselves, and Variety thanks him for it. First kill for the Kings. Second heads over to Yark. And as if the Kings needed an invitation, they've now got one to head right and pick up FG.
Yeah, you can tell the communication's all off here. I mean, Ben sent out the Dueling Dragons, and then Jake yoinks him out and says, I'll pull him back in, don't worry. So both ultimates essentially wasted, and Big Man Tings goes out unscathed. Lasbra had the damage. It was unfortunately the damage of a level 13 Pele, who just can't do much to Big Man Tings there. Now Baskin may be in some trouble, has the hammer away, and it looks like Tings, I mean, Twig saved that teleport, was not able to chase far enough, but still pushes out the Thor for a little bit longer.
Goodness gracious, what a matchup we are likely going to get tomorrow. Jade Dragons and Camelot Kings, barring a crazy Bolts turnaround here. I think what's tough, Trelly. Again, I'll pause for play-by-play for a moment. Likely going to get a Phoenix Siege here at some point, but really what's harsh, I think, for the Bolts and the fans that were cheering them on early was that game one for the first 10 or so minutes looked like a very convincing, almost vintage win streak type Bolts game. But then the moment that game went sideways, now leading into game two, even after a really nice 5-man play on right, the Bolts have just not had answers for the Camelot Kings. Then on the flip side of that same conversation, Kings fans thrilled. We've now seen 2 types of wins. Again, in all likelihood, 2 types of wins from the Kings here today. Bit behind, no pressure on left in game 1, and now just complete dominance here in game 2.
Yeah, I was tracking BMT's XP, seeing if he could double up Awesome Jake's level, but
level 20 at 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was 11 from Awesome Jake to 20 of BMT. It was
Twig also 20 at 20 minutes.
It was close, but not quite able to get double. Variety, though, could be in some trouble. Lord of the Afterlife's out. Dueling Dragons off the mark. Here comes the island, though.
Yeah, but have we seen this story before, Trelly? Have we already done this once? Oh my God, Tings obliterates the Olympus Bolts. It is a bait and switch from Variety, and the Earthshaker breaks the ground beneath the Bolts as if the Kings needed an easier time sieging the Bolts base. Variety, quote, caught out, but it's really the Bolts who stepped too far forward.
Yeah, there's just no way Variety's going down with that build. The Spirit Robe, the Heartward Amulet, just too much protections. And now, sieging forward are the Camelot Kings. Once again, the Phoenix hasn't even went down, but they're looking to try and dive the base. All the while, Genetics has been stopping Baskin's back, making sure that he can't come and help out his team. That mid-bird, gone. And now it looks like grouping up towards the left side of the map. There's still one more Tier 2 tower to go. And I can't find, even in a movie, I couldn't find a way for the Olympus Bolts to try and find a pick.
Right, so it's montage time right now.
Yeah. They're in their training arc.
The Donza is going to start doing some sit-ups in base. Ven is going to have flashbacks to winning Worlds. Lasbra's going to farm 5 levels.
That would be ideal.
In the next couple of minutes, Lasbra behind Genetics on XP. Here's the thing, this training arc is about 6 episodes long, and we've got 1 episode worth of time here.
And Season 2, they're coming.
Right, Season 2? Well, Bolt's considering matchup 2 later on in the weekend.
Right.
Because in all likelihood, I was saying that when the Kings were 5,000 ahead. It's such a dynamic Bolts team. I love watching these guys play, but I think just a bit frustrating to play against the Kings, who are just so clean and calculated in effectively every aspect of the game.
Yeah, the calculated, I think, is the word there, because Variety doesn't panic, doesn't ult out immediately, took up as much damage as possible, saved that Lord of the Afterlife, got as close to Tings as possible, then that Earthshaker comes through. Those are the kind of plays that you can only make when you're on a seasoned squad, for quite some time. Just the wherewithal to go for stuff like that. Lasbra, real high up in the jungle, and Captain Twig would like to take this fight if he could find him out, but the Pele will be able to go back just in time before Hunbat shows up. FG runs off in 3 seconds here, so you got to imagine a full-on reset from the Camelot Kings. They're looking to set up towards FG once again and try and get one more iteration of those. If we're looking at things that the Bolts are doing right, they've got Executioner, they've got the extra pen. Ven was able to upgrade his beats and get a Soul Reaver, so some big power spikes to be had before this next fight. With Baskin alive, there's always an opportunity to steal away that Fire Giant with Anvil of Dawn. They've got some answers, but the Camelot Kings are asking so many questions. It looks like the Bolts have their one option. It's to take the fight to Variety once again, but they walked over a ward to do it, so I'm not liking their odds.
Yeah, I don't know, Trelly. The Bolts were studying calculus, and the Kings are providing a history exam. We're in a totally different subject here in Game 2, at least over the last 10 minutes or so.
The Bolts rolled up to calculus, and it was just home ec.
Yeah, the dream where, you sleep somehow through all of your college classes for a semester, and then you wake up and it's finals day, and you realize you don't know anything.
You ask everyone, did you know there was a test today? And they're like, yeah, man, we all knew there was a test. We know all this stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately for the Bolts, they're living that nightmare now in Game 2. Luckily, not an elimination game or an elimination set for the Olympus Bolts. More opportunities. Remember, there are 6 teams in this event. 4 will qualify. Fortunately, it looks like the longer road for the Bolts. Are we going to do this once more? No. The Bolts have studied up a bit since last time. Variety baits in a few, but those few Bolts back away. And that'll be second Fire Giant of the game for the Kings at the 24-minute mark. Mid Phoenix about to respawn. Still a tier 2 over on left. Seems like a pretty obvious roadmap now for the Camelot Kings. Maybe, you know, we saw Twig overextend once in game 1. You're starting to look at those types of, all right, we're so far ahead, I turn off my brain type misplays from the Kings.
That's pretty much the opportunity that the Camelot Kings would have to give to the Bolts, right? They can sit underneath. It's not enhanced Fire Giant, so there is still some plays to be had. You know, Awesome Jake's got the Emp armor, but Genetics just finished an Emp armor of his own, so even that is not going to help out. And with the Oni Fire, or the Oni minions, and I guess Oni Fire minions could be spawning in mid. Actually, the Phoenix just responded. Just Oni minions.
One Fire, one Oni.
Going through mid-wave. It's not going to be easy. The Olympus Bolts have to have a completely calculated pick before the fight starts, or some massive overextensions from the Camelot Kings. It looks like sending Variety. I mean, he can't die with 3 around him by himself, so sending him towards mid with the Fire Wave and against 5 Bolts, probably not scary. I think this Osiris is going to be sitting just fine. They've got a Trebuchet on the way as well. And look at that, a stun, and rather clear the wave at that point than try and poke out this Osiris. It'll stick more.
Yep. Basket now in an awkward spot where the Anvil of Dawn can initiate from over the wall, but you almost need the extra assistance of the Emp armor, but Genetics has one as well, so somewhat equalized underneath the left side bird. And now with the advantage of Trebuchet, I mean, Kings could just watch this get burnt. Uh-oh, hello, Yark. He says goodbye. He'll use the Aegis, dash away. Now Ven's ultimate down. The immediate eject button from the Olympus Bolts. Left side Phoenix is an afterthought. So is Barracuda. The Kings can seemingly do no wrong. Maybe Tings has done some wrong, though. He'll step forward. Earthshaker at his feet. He'll take 2 with him. Then the Camelot Kings make very few, if any, mistakes in Game 2. They will take the game and take their first set of the Phase 3 playoffs over the Bolts.
Awesome Jake almost pulled 2 into the well there. I was thinking, if he saved up the island just for a massive save there, maybe that fountain could have helped them out, but they just did not have. I mean, there was some overextensions there. BMT uses both relics. Yarkor used both relics before the fight even started, but the Camelot Kings had the lead where you can make mistakes like that and still win the fight handily. Yep. When your tanks are that tanky, it almost doesn't matter if you don't have your carries in a situation. You just need the Fire Minions to push in, and then the Titans going down.
So now we have a Dragons Kings matchup tomorrow. Winner of that goes to Worlds, straight up. Now, loser of that, I'm betting all my money on Dragons and Kings, whether it's this weekend or through group stages if everything goes sideways, both making it to Worlds at some point. But what a crazy matchup, and you got to think about seeding, those sorts of things that can come into play. But look, this is just about as clean as it gets in Game 2 from the Camelot Kings. Bolts, some good to look at there in Game 1. They're going to need a lot more of that throughout this weekend. Not out of Worlds qualification contention this weekend just yet. More matches for them. Kings forced to be reckoned with here, 2-0 over the Olympus Bolts. That's it for Trilly and I. The desk will break this one down.
Yeah, forced to be reckoned with. That might even still be putting it lightly somehow. It is insane. I mean, Mifflin, you had even asked for it. Early game pressure from the Bolts, and they started it with about as early game pressure as you can get, right? 5-on-1, just jump on the Osiris. And that might have been, maybe not the last good moment, but that was the last moment it felt like they were fully in control.
That was before the 1 minute. That was before the 0 minute mark.
1 minute. Well, and again, probably not the last moment. They had a few more after that one. But there were definitely some crazy turnarounds from the Kings, moments that maybe should have been wins for Bolts that they just stripped away from them. And I mean, right out from under their feet. Some really, really sick plays. Honestly, I have to call out Captain Twig specifically. There were a couple of plays that it just didn't seem like anything was going to happen, that suddenly everything was going Kings, and it was off the back of the Hunbats. Just a lot of good from the Kings, as it turns out, here in game number 2.
Yeah, it seems like Variety came back with a vengeance. Oh, you're going to 5-man me at 0. Let me go ahead and jump into your backline and stay there for the rest of the game, because, by the way, I'm a tanky Osiris in the late game. So maybe one of the last opportunities the Olympus Bolts had to deal with him. But this was a standard top-to-bottom Kings performance. get the lead, play it slow, get the objective, play it slow, get the next objective, and work your way through the entirety of the map. It has got to be one of the most frustrating win conditions to fall into, because you know the Camelot Kings, once they've got the lead, they're not going to panic go for a Phoenix. They're not going to overcommit to invading your speed. They're going to get the first Fire Giant, they're going to grab a couple towers, and then they're going to get the next Fire Giant, right? And that's just their standard MO. So when you know the enemies aren't going to make a mistake, it puts additional pressure on the team that's behind to go for heroic plays, and in that situation, that tends to lead to mistakes.
Well, they look really clean here, which is a good step forward for them. Again, trying to qualify for Worlds. And if you can look this clean at Worlds once you qualify there, that also would feel really solid for them. I'm sure they have to be feeling pretty good, but you don't got to take it from me. We've got the Kings standing by for an interview.
That's right. Kings and Variety specifically with me now after a Game 1 and Game 2. Very convincing win, Variety. Rewind with me, if you will, to negative 18 seconds here in Game 2. You get 5-manned by the Bolts. Tilt factor, 0 to 10. What's the mental like after something like that to start your Game 2?
I wasn't tilted at all, honestly, because luckily it was Baskin who got the kill. So even though we got the kill on first blood, I still managed to get pressure in the lane. So the first blood goal didn't really affect anyone else on the map apart from my lane. And I knew that I'd always have pressure in lane because I'm playing Osiris into Thor. So yeah, I just knew that the first blood wasn't really going to impact the game at all.
You know, it's interesting because we watched Game 1 and the Bolts duo had decent amount of pressure building up in that game, weren't able to play through it. Little gold deficit for you guys early in Game 1, you're still able to come back. Do you think you guys, more than maybe any other team in the league, have a wider gold threshold where you're starting to feel uncomfortable than maybe anyone else? Do you think you feel better down gold than maybe any other team in the league?
I think so, yeah. I think a lot of mistakes are made when you're behind in gold and team goes to an objective and tries to pull it. And realistically, you probably shouldn't be fighting because the mage early camp might have like a full item over your tier 2 like mid laner. I think that's where a lot of mistakes are made, and I feel like in this meta and with the items in the game right now, I feel like if you can just get your carries online, every game is winnable no matter what the gold deficit is. So I think we're just best at not panicking, not going to contest objectives we shouldn't contest, and just playing around what we know is best for us.
Well, this win sets you up against the Jade Dragons tomorrow, a chance to qualify straight up to Worlds tomorrow. We'll have seeding, of course, later on here in the weekend. How important is it for you and the rest of your team to qualify tomorrow to Worlds? Is the weight of that starting to build up a bit?
I think it's really important to qualify tomorrow. Even if we make the finals and don't win the finals, I think it's really important to show that we are capable of taking down a top team in a LAN setting, because I think the past 4 tournaments we've been in the finals 3 times and lost every single time. I think it's just really important for us to get in the mental state that we can actually be a top team and beat anyone at the top level, especially in the LAN setting here.
Variety, it's about as clean as it gets from you guys here today. A little warm-up going up against the Jade Dragons tomorrow. Congrats on the win. Looking forward to that set, and we'll go back to the desk to wrap this one up.
I just think well said, right? I mean, when it comes down to what this team is looking forward to, Mifflin, being able to showcase, like taking down a team like the Dragons, depending on how the rest of the weekend goes looking forward, because much like Variety said, you go back to Worlds, Finals, but second. You go to Masters 1, Finals, second. Masters 2, Finals, second. All of a sudden you get here and you're like, all right, guys, come on. Like, you got to be able to get there. And again, that's part of why, at least in Waiting Room, you're talking about the fact that this is like maybe one of the most successful teams we've ever seen, despite the fact that they haven't got all the accolades maybe to decorate them. And this game and this set maybe kind of showcased exactly why they are regarded as one of those top teams, why they always end up making it to the finals, even if they don't quite go over the hill to be the champion of whatever it is they're fighting.
Just the picture of consistency, I think, is the Camelot Kings. They have always placed within the top portion of the seeding. They've always made it through some of these tournaments. I mean, made it to finals in just about every single one this year as well. It's just need a little bit of that edge. We want to see Phase 2 Camelot Kings, right? Where they were going nearly undefeated and tying up the wins record of the SPL. That's the version that their fans want to make sure is gearing up as we get closer and closer to the world stage. And I think Variety hits the nail on the head. Sure, it is likely the Camelot Kings, even in a loss up against the Jade Dragons, will be one of the teams that qualifies in the Worlds, but it is good to hear that Variety and the rest of the team want the win there regardless, want to prove that they could take out one of the favorites going into the last couple of weeks of the year, the last month or so of Season 9. So nothing but good from the Camelot Kings here in this set. Whether or not they can continue to do so, I'd argue probably could, right? These guys are incredibly, incredibly consistent. But the interesting thing about the Camelot Kings and the Jade Dragons matchup coming up is I think that might be a straight up like Pokemon style counter matchup, right? Like these guys are fire and the Jade Dragons are water in that. If we're always looking for the late game, if we're always going for that clean style of play, objective base, get greater Scorpions, there's one team in the league that's really going to throw a wrench in that style, and it's the guys that are Jazzberry jamming, well, earbuds in, just listening to their music, going to work, and running it down from minute one. The Jade Dragons, I think, probably have a direct counter matchup into the Kings.
It's going to be fun to watch, I think, specifically because of that reason you just highlighted, right? Like Dave mentioned it. The Kings, maybe one of the, if not the, best team from behind just because of how far, like, that window, right? They could be down 10,000 gold and, like, still theorizing how they can play back into that game. There obviously is still a threshold where it's like, okay, maybe we start thinking about the next game, but that threshold's much larger for them than maybe any other team in the league, and you could hear that in the interview. You could hear Variety kind of believe that. The Dragons are a team that will test that because they are the team, like you said, that will hit the ground running, get that gold lead as big as they possibly can early on. And if you can drag them to 45 minutes into a slug, then absolutely go for it. But sometimes it's just not that easy. They end a game at sometimes at 21. I think
19.
I was going to say sub 20 minutes on occasion. That one's going to be really fun. The Leviathans are also going to be playing the Titans tomorrow, which I think is going to be really fun. I'm also anticipating what we'll see and changes from the Bolts and the Warriors. Because we look at the bracket, for those of you who are wondering, the teams that lost today are not out just yet. They're sitting in the elimination round. We'll be seeing them on Saturday, and we'll see what they have to offer. Things are going to be changing starting tomorrow. Not only are we going to get to see the Leviathans and the Dragons, but we're all kicking off with best of fives. It's best of five from here on out, from Friday through Sunday, and we'll be doing 2 a day. So tomorrow, Leviathans Titans into Dragons Kings. Then Saturday, it'll be the losers of those versus the Bolts and Warriors, respectively, and then we'll start going through seeding on Sunday, finding out the first seed, again, gets to pick their opponent out of the 4 teams that come from the group stage. Second seed gets to pick of the remaining 3, third seed of the remaining 2, and fourth seed gets left with whatever's left. So being able to not only qualify, but maybe even get a higher seed could feel pretty great for any of these teams here. Choosing your opponent is a huge advantage. And tomorrow, Mifflin, I mean, best of 3s versus best of 5s, what we've seen most of this year versus only at the big events. That changes the feel of a lot of these games, and especially when you're looking at Dragons Kings, which I believe the last time in a tournament they met was at the Summer Masters in the finals, and they won, the Dragons did, and it took them 5 games to get there. Things shift when you've got that much to go through, and I'm really just excited to see what these 2 teams have to offer.
Yeah, adaptations to be sure. No matter what, whoever wins their sets tomorrow does qualify for Worlds. No eliminations, though, so if your favorite teams happen to take an L, they'll have a second chance. So make sure that you're tuning in tomorrow and seeing who is going to be going to Worlds. But regardless, I think we're in for some good Smite.
Yeah, no one is going to get eliminated
tomorrow.
Until Saturday.
No one's going to get eliminated
a little while.
tomorrow.
Yeah, but 2 teams, though, of the 6 are going to disappear. And so you got to maybe cross your fingers if one of your teams are now in the top 4. Probably feeling pretty confident about that one. I'm excited to watch this again, best of 5s. The other news regarding the best of 5s, and this is something I meant to mention, almost slipped my mind, we're going to be starting earlier, right? We're going to start around 11 a.m. live here. So you're going to want to make sure you tune in today. It's a nice relaxed afternoon, but tomorrow is when it gets serious for a lot of these teams. Best of 5s, 11 a.m. from myself, from Mifflin, from everyone here at production. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you for tuning in now, and I hope I'll see you back tomorrow as we continue the Phase 3 playoffs.